Well, there you have it. Barely 10 minutes in, and a straight white man botches a term in a highly sensitive conversation. Ain't that typical? Staley is a true gem and a wonderful friend, so she handled my verbal no-no with grace in class and kindly corrected and educated me. Didn't change the fact that I felt embarrassed, silly, and worried that I had offended my friend, or perhaps even one of you out there tuning in. I imagine that fear of saying something wrong or sounding ignorant is not unique to me, but in order for all of us to progress, we will need to be comfortable learning, which can sometimes be an awkward process. Staley will touch on this later, but it should never be the job of a minority group to educate members of the power class, especially when we all have handheld compendiums of information that make the Library of Alexandria look like a freshman bookshelf. So, in order to serve as an intermediary between members of a community who are probably good and tired of explaining themselves and more privileged class members who don't face discrimination frequently, what up, my brothers, I decided to do a little homework. First, let's discuss some terminology. Staley touches on this later as well, but for clarity, if you are like me in that you jive with the gender that you were assigned at birth, such as me being assigned male and me being down with that, you are cisgender. The cis comes from a Latin term meaning on the side of, or some such sentiment. So cisgender men and women can then be straight, gay, lesbian, bi, pansexual, or asexual. This is sexual orientation, or the direction in which our sexual desires are drawn. Our sexual orientation is separate from our gender identity. I've heard it stated numerous times, sexual orientation is who you go to bed with, and gender identity is who you go to bed as. A transgender person identifies with a gender that was not necessarily assigned to them at birth, and is rooted in the understanding that gender is more than just genitals, which really tend to get all the attention when a baby is born. It's a boy, or it's a girl. But then, that reduces a person's entire gender into a single organ, which may be a little bit reductive, considering how many ways chromosomes can get organized and how many cocktails of hormones our bodies can stir up. Transgender is an umbrella term, used to describe any persons whose sense of gender transcends that of the gender assigned to them, and sometimes includes those who are gender nonconforming or non-binary. Being gender nonconforming or non-binary does not make someone transgender or vice versa. They are self-appointed labels for people who do not feel comfortable ascribing to traditional gender assignments and are best left to those individuals to refer to themselves. Staley tends to use the shorthand trans, which is generally accepted by most transgender people. A trans woman identifies as a woman, having been assigned differently, and a trans man identifies as a man, having been assigned differently. A trans woman interested in men would be straight in terms of their sexual orientation. A trans man interested in men is gay. Neither cross-dressers or drag queens are trans women, and the two should not be confused, as both are forms of self-expression, not as gender identity. A hermaphrodite is a person biologically born with reproductive elements that are both male and female, and does not necessarily equate to being transgender. The term transvestite is antiquated and was used to refer to cross-dressers, but really has no place in modern parlance. Transsexual is also an outdated term, but was strictly used in regards to individuals who have undergone surgery or medical treatment to reassign gender. Unless an individual uses that term, there's no need to bring it up. Always use a trans person's chosen name when referring to them. Using the name assigned to them at birth is known as dead naming and is considered deeply offensive, even if you knew the individual by a different name at a different time. Make the adjustment. I promise. You can do this. Tranny is short for transmission and is a portion of a car's engine block responsible for gear shifting. Make sure you check its fluid regularly, and using that term for anything else is seriously pretty fucked up. This is generally the point in the conversation when terms like PC, snowflake, and libtard start getting thrown around. Why get so hung up on the language and proper terminology? You may have noticed by this point, if you've listened to a few episodes, that I am a pretty big stickler on the power of language. I believe language is important because it forms the way we think, and the way we think creates our future. We live in a world where members of the trans community are treated as so entirely other or insignificant that they have no right to determine how they are referred to or discussed. These small linguistic nuances, such as the mistake I made, making trans a verb describing an action, as opposed to an adjective describing a person, are the terminological barriers keeping trans men and women from being seen as regular members of society. When we use language that associates their experience with a condition, a choice, or an activity, rather than a part of their personage, we make it easier to consider them as other. When any people group is treated as other, they can be diminished, ridiculed, and attacked. The way we speak about people changes the way we think about people. Attempting to adopt a more PC vocabulary is not simply about trying to not hurt anyone's feelings. It is about learning to value the humanity of another person, even when we cannot personally relate to their experience. Most of the hatred and fear brought against the transgender community is a result of patriarchal society that establishes clear boundaries between men and women and establishes a hierarchy in which men rule. The world is slowly changing, and the history of the patriarchy in Western society is being challenged, and eventually, it will shift indefinitely. The future is female, or so the slogan goes. I don't disagree with that. I think the obvious historical pendulum swing will result in a future that is dominated by female empowerment. I think that's excellent. My hope, though, is that as men learn that their masculinity does not need to be tied to power and gender roles, and as women fill spaces they have traditionally been barred from, the future will bear an equality that is both male and female, equal, fluid, and transcendent of gender divides. Maybe the future is trans, so we should start learning how to discuss it.